talk about something. There's this really weird discourse in general about people with low vision. I feel like we are very misunderstood, for lack of a better term. Like, a lot of the times I feel like I'm kind of stuck in the middle between being sighted and being blind. Obviously, I am low vision. I can see, but I also can't. It's very complicated, and that trips a lot of people up. A few years ago at one of the ACB conventions, I met this woman who was completely blind. I don't know if she had been blind since birth, but we got on the subject of guide dogs. And she was very shocked to learn that I had a guide dog. This was, I think, a year or two after I had retired Fawn, so I wasn't working a dog at that point, and I'm still not, but we were talking about guide dogs. I told her about my experience with getting a guide dog and the training and all that, and she was very shocked to learn that a guide dog school allowed me to get a guide dog. She was like, oh, they let you get a guide dog? You were allowed to get a guide dog? She couldn't comprehend that someone with low vision was able to get a guide dog. But that's not to say that there aren't some nuances to people with low vision getting guide dogs. It's kind of weird. For example, I have some friends who were denied by another guide dog school in the US because, according to that guide dog school, they had too much vision when they saw their eye reports. These people have at or around the same amount of vision that I do. They were able to go to a different guide dog school and go through the whole training process and everything, which is great. I'm not going to name the school that denied them, but that is a thing that happens. I could understand maybe being denied or told to wait if you didn't have good independent cane travel skills, because one of the things you do need to know how to do as a guide dog handler is to travel independently with a cane. The dog is not a GPS, which is a common misconception, and you need to tell the dog directions on where to go, like forward, left, right, halt, about, etc. They will sometimes, depending on the school and the training, be able to find things for you if you train them how to with a clicker. For example, Guide Dog Foundation was big on the find command. So I taught Fawn how to find a Starbucks. And when she was working and I would say find a Starbucks, if I knew we were in the vicinity of one, if we were at a mall or whatever, she would find it. But that's because of the training that she had and the training that I had and the particular school that we went to, and she just loved finding things. Now, on paper, I am considered legally blind. My visual acuity is like between 20/200 and 20/400-ish, depending on the day. Vision fluctuates, it's a whole thing. So because of that, I qualify for services for blind people, such as the ability to get a guide dog, orientation and mobility instruction from a state service agency for blind people, learning the routes to the bus stop or how to get around in my community where I live by taking public transit or by walking. Having low vision also meant that I qualified for services in school when I was growing up. I was on an individualized education plan, and that outlined the fact that I needed my work in large print. I talked about being in mainstream school. I'm not going to go through all this again. You guys can check out that video. I'll link it up above and in the description as well. But because of that, if you fall under the radar of legal blindness, or I think even low vision, you qualify for a caseworker essentially from the state services for the blind wherever you live in the United States. You or your parents, if you're too young, can register you as being blind, low vision, whatever under that umbrella. You need to have an eye exam, obviously, in order to do that, and then you are able to get the services that I outlined above. There are other things as well. You could qualify for some grants for assistive technology. There are some things that the state commission does depending on the state in terms of higher education. Like when I was in college, my tuition was waived because I went to a school in the state of Massachusetts where I grew up and lived, and I also received financial assistance for my textbooks from the Commission for the Blind because I am blind. There's also just like this general misunderstanding, and it's really hard to kind of talk about it sometimes with sighted people. A lot of the times I'll tell people that I'm blind. I won't go into, oh, I'm low vision, I'm visually impaired, because they don't understand what that means. And if I don't want to spend the time talking about it, which generally I don't if I am trying to ask for assistance to get somewhere or whatever the case may be, I will just say that I'm blind or that I have a little bit of vision I can see. There has been this recent issue that cropped up because Netflix announced a casting call for Toph for the live action Avatar: The Last Airbender. For those of you who may not know, if you didn't watch the original cartoon, Toph is completely blind. She is a young teenager. She appears in early season 2, and she is an earthbender. Her parents suppressed her earthbending abilities because the show was set a billion years ago in times when people with disabilities were not really out in the public eye, and they thought it best to kind of keep her at home and have her under their watchful eye. Her parents in the show are also incredibly wealthy, and they have the resources and means to kind of do that. However, Toph in her spare time sneaks around and she does this earthbending underground battle ring and then ends up joining the main team on their adventures as the Avatar's earthbending instructor. But for Netflix, they are preferring that the casting stays as authentic to the role as possible. So far, they've done a pretty decent job of casting authentic people in these roles in terms of having them be Native or Asian. For Toph, they are specifically looking for people who are blind or low vision and have lived experience being blind or low vision, as well as Asian, because the character is Asian. The thing that I saw a lot online from the public was a weird like outcry. I don't understand when people were so happy about casting for the other roles, and now it comes to searching for Toph and suddenly this is an issue because Netflix is looking for someone who is blind or low vision to fill the role of a blind character. We've talked about some of this in the past when I did my videos on In the Dark and talked about a whole bunch of things in terms of people with disabilities not being cast authentically or portrayed authentically in the media. And in recent years, that has definitely kind of been better in some senses, not all, but Hollywood seems to be casting more people who are disabled to represent disabled roles. And that's great. However, for some reason, people see an issue with Toph, with the casting call, because they are looking for someone who's blind. I don't understand. I literally got into a Facebook fight with some guy on an Avatar fan page because he said, and I quote, blind and martial arts experience don't really go hand in hand. One of the other things for the role is that they are hoping that whoever auditions has some sort of martial arts or dance experience because a lot of the show involves fighting. It's not a requirement, but it's like a nice to have sort of thing. Now, I don't know if I've ever talked about this before, but I took martial arts when I was younger for several years. In a mainstreamed class with sighted people, I was the only low vision kid. The instructor at the time, before he left the studio, had taught someone prior to me who was completely blind, and he taught her like all of the karate moves like tactily. So I don't know, I think I got up to like the mid-range belts and then I stopped doing it because I got too busy with school, and then I decided to go do figure skating for several years prior to graduating high school. Had I stuck with it, I probably could have been a black belt, but I didn't. I know a couple of other people who are completely blind who are black belts in mixed martial arts or some other form of martial arts. A friend of mine competed in Paralympic judo for several years. I think she might have also won. And Ankar also did martial arts for a long time when he was growing up. Regardless of whether or not you're completely blind or low vision, you can definitely be taught to dance or to have some form of self-defense martial arts capabilities. I also took dance lessons when I was younger, from like the age of 5, I think, to the time I was 8 or 9. The dance that I took was a combination of ballet, tap, and jazz, and then I think we had to pick at one point as we got later into the classes, and I think I ended up picking ballet. I was in a billion recitals as a kid because, you know, that's what happens when you're in dance, and it was a whole thing. I know other people who are low vision who also took dance lessons. I know people who are completely blind who know how to figure skate. I know people who are completely blind who know how to act on stage and can act on stage. I myself was in quite a few performances growing up in mainstream school, and when I used to do these outreach programs at Perkins School for the Blind, they would have like a theater week during one of the school vacations, and that whole thing was we rehearsed a play, and then at the end of the week we performed that play to like the general public, and it was a whole big thing. It was a big deal. I did that for a couple of years. I've gotten a little off track here, but what I'm saying is basically I myself am legally on paper considered blind or low vision. I use those terms interchangeably, blind, visually impaired, low vision. Some other people do too. Some people don't. It's all a personal preference thing. This guy in the Facebook comments kept parroting to me the definition of blind versus visually impaired, like the actual dictionary definition, and he could not comprehend that yes, those terms are sometimes used interchangeably, and yes, everybody is on the spectrum of blindness, whether you have no vision or have a little bit of vision or have a lot of vision but are still considered blind. Because of that, that he could not fathom a completely blind person being able to do martial arts, nor could he fathom even, I think, a low vision person such as myself having any martial arts experience. It's that sort of perpetualized ableism that is really a huge problem in society, and I wish that people would just be more understanding of these issues. At least not be totally textbook bigots about it. It's one thing to be like, oh, I don't understand, and then have someone explain it to you and then be like, oh yeah, okay. But it's also another thing for someone to just completely miss the point and basically be unteachable in these moments. Now, I don't care if someone is unable to grasp that concept. Yes, it does bother me a little bit, but it's also frustrating too, because then it's like, okay, well, here's this person in the world who just simply cannot understand or grasp this one simple concept, and they and the people that are in their circle are probably never going to get it, and the people in their circle are probably of that same mindset, and then it just might grow and expand from there, and that's not great. Versus the other hand, where there are people who have the understanding, have the knowledge, or might not have the understanding, and then they get it because they talk to a disabled person, and they're not trying to constantly tell the disabled person about what their disability is and how their disability works and the nuances like this bro did to me on Facebook. What I'm saying is I am visually impaired. I use a screen reader occasionally on my phone. I use VoiceOver. Not so much on my Mac. I use a screen magnifier. I use a white cane. I had a guide dog at one point. I also know Braille, and I was taught Braille alongside print growing up when I was in school. However, I have not kept up with my Braille skills, and that is 100% completely on me. They also kind of changed the code a little bit. So if you're in the US versus in Canada or the UK or other English-speaking countries, there were some differences between English Braille depending on the country that you were in. About 10 years ago, I think in like 2013 or 14-ish, they made the change to UEB, which is Unified English Braille. Not 100% sure what those changes are. I learned a little bit of it when I was at a conference at around that time because there was like a little workshop about it. I found it confusing. I know enough Braille to kind of get by. I can read signage and labels if I need to. I remember most of the contractions. I know the uncontracted alphabet, but the UEB stuff is just like not something that I was really able to grasp fully. My vision can fluctuate sometimes from day to day. I have terrible vision at night. Also, if I'm outside and it's like glaringly bright from the sun, like if it's a completely clear day and the sun is just glaring off of everything, can't see. Time for sunglasses. Same for like when it snows and the sun is glaring off of the snow. That's also difficult for me with my vision because of the light sensitivity that I have. You talk to me, I say this. You talk to the next person, they'll say something completely different. Do I think that I'm blind enough? Sometimes no, but sometimes I do. I really spend like no time at all thinking about my place in the blind community. I know where I stand. I'm visually impaired. I'm kind of in the middle, kind of more towards the high partial end of the blindness spectrum, I guess, if you want to. But to have someone just completely tell me that I'm not part of the blind community because I'm not like the textbook definition of blind, and coming from an ignorant, non-disabled person is really aggravating, and it kind of like plays into the whole ableism thing that I talked about a couple of videos ago. I'm going to link that also up here and down in the description as well. So I don't really know like what the point of this video was. I kind of just wanted to talk about those two little anecdotes here with the woman who couldn't understand that I had a guide dog and this bro on Facebook who also cannot grasp that blind people are able to do martial arts. And in my opinion, I think we have to learn how to defend ourselves because there are some really awful people out there, and blind people, specifically women, often fall target to horrible, horrible things. That is my TED Talk for today. Thank you guys so much for coming. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it a little informative, maybe even entertaining. Please leave any comments, feedback, or suggestions down below if you have them, and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.